3, 2, 1, let's go. Hi everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtual Void, aka Mike Smith, and today we're going to be talking about the var, let, and const statements, const being short for constants. In addition, we're going to be covering what scoping does within JavaScript. It's just a very basic, light overview of scoping. So we're going to be covering var, let, const, and scoping. Are you ready? Let's get started. So before we get to var, let, and const, let's talk about scope. Now, what is scope? Scope is a section of code in which a variable is available. As long as that code is running, that variable is available to be used. Once you get outside that code, the variable is no longer to be used. Now, back in the old days of JavaScript, back when it first came out, all variables were in the global scope. You declared a variable and every single function could use it no matter what. And this created some problems. And I'm going to show you exactly why it created problems here. Let's take a look at a sample program. Every one of my variables that I've declared is now a global variable. So my code here is going to, first of all, set the variable to 1, and it's going to say, hey, I've started my global variable here. It's going to call first function, and it's going to call second function, and then it's going to const out the end. First function is going to change the variable, and it's going to call something called inner function. Inner function is then going to change the variable a couple more times and going to do some other funky stuff here. The important thing is second function, excuse me. When second function is executed, it's looking for my var, which was declared up here, to be set to 1. Now the problem here is that if you take a look at it, first function has changed it to 2 and inner function has changed it to 3 and to 4. So it's done a whole bunch of work to it. But second function needs it to be 1. And if it doesn't make it 1, it will print out an error. And that's one of the problems you have with using global variables, is that any function anywhere can change that variable. And if you have another function that depends upon that variable, you're pretty much going to be in trouble. So what we want to do here is let's take a look into Node and see how that operates. That's exactly what I expected to happen. I started out with my global variable to 1. My first function set it to 2. My inner function went to set it to 3. It went to 4. It came out 4. First function came out 4. When it got the second function, though, second function needed to be 1, and so it printed out the error. So developers were constantly running into this problem. They're saying, you know, guys, we need to have a better way of doing this. And so they created the var statement. And the var statement allows you to scope variables within an application. So let's take a look at the var statement. So var allows us to declare a variable within scope. Now, what do we mean by scope? In general, for the sake of this example here, we're defining scope as the function scope. Now, if you really get into JavaScript, there's a lot of little nuances here and there, but for this example, any variable that's declared within the function is within the function scope. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, I'm taking the original program I had before, and I've now put the command var at the very beginning of each of my variable declarations. And what that will do is that it will declare everything within scope. My var equals 1 at the beginning here is going to declare it within the global scope, which is in actuality no difference than what I had before. What is very different is in the first function. I've redeclared it here within first function, and that means my var equals 2 will only be used within first function. Once it gets out of first function, it will ignore itself and disappear. So does it overwrite the global variable? No, not at all. It creates another variable, a local variable for lack of a better term, so that when first function operates, in this case I just had the two console.logs here, it's going to look first for the variable declaration within its scope, and it's going to find this one. So from its point of view, my var is equal to 2. What if it doesn't find the variable within that scope? Well, then it will go to the global scope and figure out what needs to be done there, or get the variable from there. So I know for a fact that my var is going to be equal to 2 while I'm inside first function here. I know for a fact that my var is going to be equal to 3 or 4 within the second function. Now, notice I have a var declaration down here too. Does that mean that my var is going to be changed to 4, and then once it gets back out of this little block here, it's going to be changed to 3? No, not at all, because with the var statement, everything's within the function block, not within an if block, but within a function block. So if it starts out the 3 here, it gets changed to 4 here, it's going to still stay 4 once I get down to here. So again, the var statement puts everything within the scope. This first one's within the global scope. This was within the scope of first function, and it will forget it once it finishes up. And then this one's within inner function. So for all these console.logs, what I would expect is that this one will go to 1. This one will stay at 1 because I know for a fact I'm not changing anything in the other functions. Back to first function down here, this is going to 2, so this should stay to 2. This should also be 2. And when I come back down to here, this one should be 3. This one should be 4. This one should also be 4 because I'm changing the variable right here and I'm not within a function block. The big one, second function, when it gets into here, I expect this to be okay because remember, if my var is equal to 1, it's not going to get changed within first function, nor will it get changed within inner function. So when second function gets a hold of it, it's still going to be equal to 1. You want to prove it? Let's take a look at it. Let's go into node and type in node var. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. I started out at 1, I ended at 1. My first function started at 2, it ended at 2. My inner function started at 3, got changed to 4, and it kept to 4. And so when second function got it, it said all systems go. So that's the key with var. Var will allow you to declare a variable within a function scope. And that will allow you to use those variables within that function scope without having to worry about changing any variables that are within the global scope. So declaring a variable within the function block was all great and everything, but programmers as time came along really needed to have a little bit better control. Wouldn't it be great to be able to scope a variable within, let's say, an if block or a switch block? And so they created the let statement. And the let statement worked exactly the same way as the var statement, except that it will allow you to scope variables not only within the function block, but within, let's say, an if block or switch block. Let's take a quick look at it. This is the exact same program I've used before, but instead of saying var my var, I'm now saying let my var. And you can see that here in first function and also inside inner function here. It works exactly the same way as var. I'm declaring the global variable there. I'm declaring a variable that is within the scope of the first function. But the key here is of how let works can be found within the inner function. Now before, when I used the var, I declared the my var is equal to 3 here, then it got redeclared here 4, so when it got to this final console.log, the final value was 4. But let now scopes within actual blocks, and a block is, again, for the purposes of this example here, a block is anything within the curly Q brackets. So here is a function block, and within inner function here is an if block. So by using let my var equals 3 right there, I am declaring my var to be equal to 3 within the function block, but with my var equals 4 right here, I'm declaring it within this if block. So it has created a third my var to be used within the if. So I have the if my var here, I have the inner function my var here, and of course I have the global one. But again, like I said earlier with the var, the let statement will basically say, look within this block for a variable that's declared. If you don't find it there, look within the block ahead of it. If it's not there, look within the global function. So what I would expect within the inner function is that this to print out 3, because I've declared 3 here, this to print out 4, but unlike var, this to print out the number 3. And why is that? And the reason that is that I have declared my var as a let within the statement here. So therefore it is scoped to the if and not scoped to the function. Let's take a quick look and see how that works. Let's go into node and let's type in node let. Sure enough, it's exactly what happened here. This hasn't changed from the var, neither did this change from the var, but what changed was the inner function. It started out at 3, it went to 4, but that is a new variable within the if block. And so when it got out of the if block, it forgot that local variable set to 4, and now it's going back to the original variable set to 3. So let will allow you to define variables within a specific block. Now, I want to show you one very interesting thing about let. Let's go back to the code. Oopsies. And I almost made a mistake there. Let's go back to the code here, and I'm going to go to first function here, and I'm going to say let my var equal 5. Let me show you what happens when you do that. Let's go back over to node. Boom. A let variable can only be declared one time within a function block or within any block. It cannot be declared a second time. Var you can redeclare as much as you want, but let only allows for one declaration per block. So this is an illegal function here. If I really wanted to set it to 5, I would actually have to say my var equals to 5. So there you have it. That's one of the important things about let is that you can only declare it one time within the block. You cannot declare it multiple times. So now let's take a look at const, which is short for the word constant. Now it works exactly the same way as the let variable does. I've now changed my program to say const at the very beginning instead of let or var. And I've got the same global declaration here. I've got the same first function scoped variable there, the same first inner function scoped variable there, and the same if statement scoped variable there. So let's see how that works. Let's flip over to Node and type in node const, and I got the exact same thing as I did with let. So what's the difference between const and let? Let me show you. Let's go real quick back over to our let statement. And I'm going to go to inner function here, and I'm going to remove the let out of the if statement there, which basically now means it will use the variable that is scoped to inner function, which means I should get the same thing as var before. I should get 3, 4, and 4. Let's flip back over to Node. Let's take a look at that. Yep, sure enough, I got 3, 4, and 4. So what happens if I do the same thing to const? Let's go down to inner function. Let's remove const. Let's flip over to Node. Boom, shakalaka. Yep, it got an error. Notice the error. Assignment to constant variable. That's the beauty of const. It defines a variable to be constant. And what exactly does that mean? It means that you cannot change the value once it has been declared, nor can you change the variable type once it has been declared. Now, there are some exceptions I'll show you in just here in a second, but the big thing here that I want you to take away from const is that you would declare that if you don't want to have your variables redeclared or changed later on in the program or later on within the scope function. So it's wonderful to be able to define variables that you know for a fact will never change. Now, there are some strange things about const that I want to make sure you understand here. So I'm going to go through some of the rules concerning const, and especially one of the big, huge, giant gotchas, especially something that got me quite some time ago when I first started learning about const. First of all, as shown on the screen here, is that you cannot redeclare a variable that starts with const. So if I go over to Node here and I type in node const2, as you can tell there, I cannot redeclare the variable. Other things you cannot do, what I'm going to do here is I've got some code automatically set up here. Other things you cannot do is you cannot change the value of a constant as it is shown there. So let's flip back over to Node. As you can tell there, I cannot assign a new value to Node. Other things you cannot do with constants. You cannot change the data type of a constant, which of course makes sense. If you can't change the value, why should you be able to change the data type? So if we do that, and we go into constant2 here, I still can't make the assignment. Now, those are the things you really can't do with a constant. That sounds all well and good, but there are a couple of gotchas that you do need to be concerned about. Because did you know that if you do declare a value to be constant, you can change it under certain circumstances? Let me show you what those circumstances are. First circumstance I want to show you is this particular one. I have an array here. Constant my var equals 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I set the first constant, or the first element of that array, to be 10. I should expect to get an error message out of this, but watch what happens. Let's flip back over to Node. It changed it. So why did that happen? Because constant, the way it works is it will not allow you to change, again, the data type. It will not allow you to change the value, but only for simple variables. We're talking about booleans, numbers, strings. For more complex objects like arrays, you are allowed to be able to change the values within the arrays. You just cannot change the initial value of that object. So for instance, I have my var here as an array. I cannot change it to a string, or I can't change it to a number. But I can change individual elements, because it's not the elements within this array that are constant, it is the array itself that is constant. And it's very important to understand here, is that I can now declare my var to be a constant, and my var won't change whatsoever anywhere within the program, but the elements within the array will change. So what will happen on objects? Well, it will work the exact same way. Let's go down to the objects here, my code that I already have set up. And now I have a constant. Let's get it to where I can get it on the screen just a little bit better. I have a constant here, a constant object with cat, dog, and lizard. And lizard is question mark, question mark, question mark. And here I am changing the value of the lizard property. So should this run? Well, actually, yes, it will run. If I can type, there we go. As you can see there, cat, meow, dog, bark, lizard now says, I don't know. It got changed from question marks to I don't know. So as you can tell there, const will allow you to declare a variable that cannot change, but only if it's a simple variable. The array elements can change, the properties of an object can change. You just cannot change the initial declaration of the variable, nor can you change the value of it if it is a simple variable. And that's all there is on var, let, and const. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope it didn't bore you to death. Please make sure to visit our other videos at www.boringjavascript.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, or take a look at our blog at blog.thevirtuoid.com. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.